Thank you Skillshare for sponsoring this video. So in my last video, I said that I was planning to do a Q&A next, which is what I'm doing now. So first of all, I wanted to thank you guys so much for commenting on my last video and letting me know that you actually like that type of voiceover content. Makes me very happy because I was honestly like considering not posting it or considering making it silent because I wasn't sure if you guys wanted to listen to me talk about that kind of stuff, but yeah, it's very reassuring, and thank you for commenting, and also thank you for leaving a bunch of questions. I felt like there were enough questions that I didn't really need to do a community post. I'll probably do one later on. I do like Q&A, so I should probably do them more often. But yeah, so the art process in this video is gonna be of this fan art drawing that I did for one of my really good friends for her birthday, which was last week. And it is of her character called Lilith, and my friend is Sir Pangur. I'm sure maybe some of you have seen her art around. I love it. She's an amazing artist, and I totally recommend you guys check her out. I'll leave a link in the description. But yeah, so I got the whole process down of this, and I'm just gonna edit it after I record the voiceover because I'm not sure how long the Q&A is going to take. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy watching the process of this. I really love how this piece turned out. I really liked working on it. I feel like it's been a while since I've done something spontaneous like that, and yeah, hoping to do stuff like that more often in the near future. So yeah, just gonna jump into the Q&A right away. So yeah, well, by right away I mean like I guess 2 minutes into the video, but anyways. Okay, so the first question is, how do I come up with solid personalities for my characters? I thought that it was a pretty good question because I wasn't actually sure how it happens, and it prompted me to think about it a little bit. But typically, I think it just tends to come around organically when I think about the character's circumstances, and I don't know, it is kind of a really, like, I feel like it's not really manufactured. It's almost like when I sit down and start writing, well, first of all, I guess writing about it would be a pretty big step. Like, I don't do that for every single one of my characters. Sometimes I just know. But I think that writing about it helps a lot. So if I sit down and I start writing about them, so I'll just kind of structure it immediately as if I'm telling some sort of story, even though it's not like anything actually happens, but it's just like I typically will go into a couple of paragraphs just describing what the current circumstances of the character's life are. Like, for instance, I remember like a long time ago when my character Sock, I actually did this in a chapter. Like, back in the day, I didn't take planning too seriously, so I just kind of wrote one chapter at a time, and the chapter that I did not end up ever drawing, that was supposed to come after the initial like few chapters that I did for my webcomic back then, the same one that I'm rewriting now. I started with just writing a paragraph about Sock's circumstances. So like it's kind of like I mentioned in my character design video. You go over stuff, I tend to go over stuff like their socioeconomic status, like how they feel about their parents, like what the relationship with the parents is, like if they have friends, what kind of relationship they have with their friends, how do they like present themselves. It's all that kind of stuff. And you know, I feel like it's weird to say, like, obviously it's made up, but at the same time it just kind of like writes itself, if that makes any sense. I think I should also mention though that maybe one of the reasons why it tends to write itself for me is because I spent a lot of time looking into psychology. So that's been a constant interest of mine for a long time now, and so I've consumed a lot of educational material that is related to human psychology and I've read a lot of books, so I would say that I have, like, and obviously I come to some of my own conclusions because I really love to observe people and how they react to situations and like ponder about why they react in certain ways and all that other stuff. So that actually helps a lot when it comes to writing characters, because like, for instance, if I determine or if I decide that a character doesn't have a particularly positive relationship with their parents, like, you know, I'll think of why that is, and I think of something that may have happened when they were younger, or the way that they may have interpreted their parents' actions that made them feel a certain way, etc. So it's all like very heavy on psychology and just making a bunch of assumptions about the character or decisions based on their psychology. So maybe it would also help to think about their personality type, because people do obviously have different personality types. Like, I also have some thoughts on whether personality types come about, like how much of a personality type is actually based on a person's childhood experiences versus their genes, and as that's just like an entirely different conversation. But I actually think a ton of a person's like expressed personality comes from their experiences. I think more so than their genes, but that's just an opinion, you know. It's not like we're having a scientific conversation here. But anyways, yeah, so I tend to rely on just the general interest in psychology a lot, and just being interested in people is what helps me come up with personalities which I hope are unique in my characters. Like, I'm not gonna go as far as to say I come up with great characters or anything, but you know, I like them, so that's worth something, I suppose. So yeah, that's what makes them feel more real to me, at least anyway, to really consider like their mindset about the world. And it also really helps to think about little details, like if you could find, I'm sure there are like questionnaires that you could find online which ask a lot of random questions, like what is character's like favorite drink, or what's their favorite time of year and why. And I mean, you always have to think about why, but when you answer a bunch of these random things that are like idiosyncratic to the character, I think that also helps a lot to make them feel real. So hopefully that answered the question sufficiently. I'm just gonna pause the Q&A for a minute and tell you guys about this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is the best place to go if you want to learn something new, especially to fuel your creative side. It's a community of creatives that has a ton of classes on a huge variety of topics, taught by professionals who condense and organize their knowledge and experience into bite-sized videos. Some of my favorite topics to check out are illustration, comics, writing, productivity, and organization, but there's a ton more of topics that they have on Skillshare. So as you guys probably know, I'm writing my comic series at the moment, and it is a massive struggle, like I keep telling you about in some of my videos. And since I have very little experience with writing, I try to find information online that helps me out along with the process. And so I came across this class called The Writer's Toolkit: 6 Steps to a Successful Writing Habit by Simon Van Boy. I habitually consume a lot of content designed to help with writing, but this one in particular really stood out and really hit home for me because it focused mostly on the most difficult part of writing that I find is just getting started and like forming the habit and how to elevate the experience and make it more consistent. I feel super motivated just from listening to this class, and will definitely go back to go over it again because I honestly really enjoyed it, and it's pretty short, so I would 100% recommend you check it out if you're having issues with writing and if you feel stuck and you need to get some pointers to just like help you get started. Yeah, so you can check out this class or any of the thousands of classes on Skillshare using the link in my description, where you can get a 1-month free trial. So the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link will receive the 1-month free trial, and the link is down my description below. Thanks so much again, Skillshare, for sponsoring my video, and now back to the Q&A. And I'm gonna move on to the next question, which is generally how do I think about planning my project, or how do I go about planning my projects? That was slightly rephrased, but I think the essence of the question remains the same. So I am not the best at executing, but I think I'm relatively decent at planning a project, I think. One of the things that I honestly have learned the hard way over the past few years is that you have to pad the amount of time that you assume something will take literally by like 3 times. So if you decide that it'll take a month, write it down as taking 3 months. Like, it's annoying as hell, but that just seems to be the case for me. I used to think I have to pad things by 40%, but it turns out that you literally have to just like double the amount of time that you think it'll take, or triple in a lot of cases for me, unfortunately. But yeah, it's just a more realistic way of looking at things because, anyways, that's a tangent. So how do I go about planning things? I think I do like to think about things as far down the line as possible. So the end goal of, say, in the context of planning to work on my comic project, one of the first things that I thought about is what kind of physical products it will result in, because I have made the mistake in the past where I did not think about the physical end product, and I ended up having to do a lot of editing in terms of formatting things to be the same size. Like, I mean, my first attempt at making a comic was so haphazard. I don't blame myself because I was I was like 16 or something. I mean, that's the last thing I thought about. I didn't even realize that I was gonna continue drawing it past a few pages. So yeah, it really helps to think about what you want to make out of it in terms of product. So for Gloaming Veil, for instance, I'm not like 100% settled on what I'm going to do with it in terms of product, but one of my favorite books to collect is French comics, because they have such a nice big format, and they're typically hardcovers, or like European comics. I have a bunch, and I really love looking at them. They have very large pages, they're hardcovers, but they're relatively thin. So I think they're maybe like about 100 pages in length, or maybe even less than that in terms of page count. And from having backed a couple of Kickstarters for the production of some of these comics, I think the artist typically takes about a year to produce one of them, and some of them are serialized, like they have more than one volume. And so those are books that I love. They have beautiful big covers with like embellishments and stuff. They're a lot more substantial feeling in my hands than say like more American type of graphic novels that are usually very small for whatever reason. I mean, it's fine. I'm not passing judgments or anything, but I don't like how they tend to be small. And even with larger comics, I just feel like they feel really cheap to me. Even the editions that have several issues in them, they still feel really cheap. And I understand why that happens. It's more like to make it affordable for younger people, or like just make it affordable in general. But I want to take the more European approach, where I want to create this beautiful book that will be hopefully inspiring to look at, because I do look at the ones that I have collected so far a lot, and they bring me a lot of inspiration. And sometimes I don't even care about the story in those books. I just really love the art and the presentation, and to me that's enough. So that's kind of the visual approach that I want to go with for the product for Gloaming Veil. So that being the first step in the planning process, because that will dictate the formatting of the pages and the scale. So I'll have to, obviously all the files have to be uniform. So the first thing I did was make I haven't made the template for the actual pages yet, but I have made some templates for layouts for planning. But yeah, I have to take the size of the book into consideration and make a template so that once I'm ready to actually put the pages together into a physical product, everything is good to go, and I don't have to like panic and figure out how to reformat everything like I did last time, which was horrible. I do not recommend doing that. So after you figure out what kind of product you want to produce in the end, I think the stuff in the middle is next to plan out, like the length of your story, like how you want to approach that. If you want it to be a self-contained 1 story, like a graphic novel that will just be one volume, or if you want it to be a series. It really depends on what kind of story you want to write. So for me in particular, I think the pacing and the length will be something akin to like a series, like a show with like 10 episodes or something, which is really long actually. So I'm definitely anticipating more than one book. So to me, it's I know that it's going to be a long-term project, and that's kind of important to decide on, I guess, as well, because I realized that it might take like several years of my life or something, and that's okay if I can manage to monetize it and, you know, make a living and carry on trying to conclude the story. That sounds like a good deal to me, because I have been emotionally invested into it for like at least 10 to 12 years already, like in a serious way. So I feel like it will be sustainable for me to work on it for another several years. And I think that's a pretty important thing to think about in general. Like, I can't predict the future, and I don't know how things are gonna go and how I'm gonna feel about it, but, you know, based on past experience, I think it's a pretty safe bet that I won't lose interest if I've managed to keep it up for this long. But if you're not 100% sure if you'll be able to be interested in one project for that long amount of time, maybe it would be better to curb the length. So if you decide to, for instance, do like a self-contained one story that's a graphic novel, I think it's easier to deal with, because it's not gonna presumably like take several years of your life or whatever, because, you know, it's a pretty long time to dedicate to one thing, and it could get boring and etc. So there's that to consider. And then after that, I suppose the next stuff is like to decide how you're gonna share it with your audience, like where you will post it, whether it will be free or whether you're gonna be working on it behind the scenes and then publishing it. I haven't exactly hammered out those details yet in terms of this project, but I do want it to be free to read. I just don't know if that's gonna bite me, like if that's gonna make it difficult to monetize. But I am more interested in, you know, having people actually read the story rather than putting it behind a paywall. So if I'm planning to do a Patreon, and, you know, I will obviously make physical products. So that will be more like, you know, hoping that people are willing to invest into it as well. And maybe I will offer some early access and like extra secret type of material that I will produce, hopefully, in conjunction with the main story, which will be free to read. And hopefully that will be enticing enough for people to want to invest into it. But yeah, I do want it to be easy to access without having to pay. So yeah, and I mean, after that, the planning comes down to just the execution, and that's like a whole other can of worms. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's the question itself is kind of very broad, but hopefully that was kind of sufficient. So I would say to plan a project, you have to think of the end goal first and then figure out how to get there and break things down continuously. Sorry, my freaking AC was about to come on, or not AC, heater. Anyways, yeah, it's important to break things down further and further and further into micro steps that are actionable and that feel like you can actually accomplish them. So yeah, moving on to the next question. What do I do with all the art pieces that I finish? Traditionally, I presume. I just kind of hoard them and try to keep them safe in plastic for future. I think I'm going to put some of them up for sale during a future Kickstarter or something like that. I don't even... Oh man, it's a good question, because I do want to frame some of my stuff, because, you know, obviously I do like a lot of it, and it would be nice to have things hanging around the house, but I actually haven't gotten around to doing that at all at this point, and it's something that I should take care of thinking about the future. But anyways, yeah, I just kind of hoard them. That's the short answer to that question. Okay, next question. Why did I decide to change the name of my comic? So originally the name of my comic was Id Fracture, and, you know, it was like, I thought about it a long time, and it still fits the narrative as far as I'm concerned, but I think there's something about that title that just sounds that just doesn't sound enticing enough to me personally. And also the story has changed in a way that the scope has gotten a lot bigger and the timeline has gotten a lot bigger. It's gotten like infinitely more convoluted, and I have really bumped up the supernatural aspect of it. Like it always had a supernatural element, as some of you may or may not remember, but I think after like considering which direction I want the story to take, yeah, that aspect of it really got kind of bumped up. So I thought that It Fracture sounds, it just doesn't seem to jive with the story or where the story ended up going, I guess. So that's why I decided to change it. And I still haven't even 100% decided on what I'm gonna call it, but I do think that naming it after the town is not the worst, you know, direction to go in. So probably Gloaming Vale or something about Gloaming Vale is going to be the title. But yeah, it's still tentative. So yeah. Next question. How did I come up with the place design and idea for Gloaming Vale? The person says, I'd love to know how it all came together in your head. So I thought that was an interesting question, because I do like to think about that, because it happened so organically over a very long period of time. At this point, I'm actually kind of, it's interesting for me to think back on where it began. And so I'm gonna tell you guys some interesting, debatable use of the adjective interesting, but the backstory of the world of where my characters live. So back when I was like 12, I think, or something, like ridiculously long time ago, basically when I was just very young, I came up with a couple of stories, and one of them was called The Hotel of Nightmares, and this story had a very specific location. So it was, obviously all my stories back then, I mean, you can't expect a 12-year-old to really care about anything other than self-indulgence, which is all that it was, and I think that's totally great because it totally perpetuates the enthusiasm. But yeah, so I was obsessed with the imagery of like a remote location, like a forest, a very lush forest, like in mountains and castles. So I was kind of obsessed with castles as well. And so the main location for that story and where it took place was this mysterious castle up in the mountains, and there was like all this story surrounding it and a bunch of characters that live in it. So the reason why it's called Hotel of Nightmares is because it's a place for transients, or people who think they're gonna stay there for some time and then they're gonna leave, but then they end up staying and some terrible things happen to them. But anyways, so that was kind of the base of my main story that I was really into and that I drew a lot of art for and came up with a lot of characters for. And then fast forward, when I was about 16, I had a project, a group project actually, well, like a partner project for my art class, and it was to create a short comic. And of course, for me, that was incredible because I always loved comics. And so I mean, I was on board with this like 100%, and it was like the most exciting thing that's ever happened in school. So I pretty much took the reins on coming up with the story, or at least the idea for the story, and that was how my It Fracture comic started. And I came up with the story within like, it was literally on the spot, and it was also 100% self-indulgent. I really still to this day love stories that have some sort of like a cross-dressing component. It's always been the most entertaining type of stuff to me. So like, if you guys have read manga, it would be like Pretty Face, or Kill Me, Kiss Me, or this other one called, what was it called? It was like the ski jumping manga. I think it was called No 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 or something. Those were so entertaining to me, and I could name like a million movies that have this type of concept as well. So it's kind of like the trope, and that was my favorite thing in terms of fun and entertainment. So I wanted to kind of make a story like that as well, and that's why the first character I came up with was Fiona, who is a boy that dresses like a girl because of his crazy mom, and that was basically the backstory, and obviously all sorts of fun shenanigans resulted in that trickery. So that was the base of Id Fracture, and obviously it started as this super lighthearted like comedy type of thing, but I quickly realized that I like to do more drama type of stories, like in terms of narrative. Like I still love the fun and like gag, like jokey type of elements and stories, which I had in my previous stories as well, but I do like the serious drama, and I really love the angst, you guys, you know, like still do, always kind of did as a teenager. And after I completed the project aspect of it, which was like, I don't know, I think it had to be like 10 pages or something, since I've never managed to do anything of that length. I know it's pathetic because it's only 10 pages, but I've never really managed to do like a personal project that's so long. I decided that it would be a huge waste to not continue it, and so I decided to expand on the story, flesh out the characters that randomly popped in like on the spot while I was drawing it at the time. And that's how Id Fracture became a thing, because I quickly came up with like some backstories, and yeah, it got convoluted real fast story-wise. But okay, my point is that I decided to place the story of Id Fracture and Fiona as the main character within the world of the Hotel of Nightmares, which was the other story that I had from years back when I was like a kid. And it essentially became kind of like a crossover where there were characters that had something to do with the characters in the Hotel of Nightmares. Specifically, Heijin had something to do with it. It was part of her past, and the rest of the kids had nothing to do with it. And so it was kind of like this crossover, and that made it really fun for me. It was so engaging for me to be able to see these two little worlds collide. And so I chose to situate the town where the kids were from, like by kids I mean like Fiona and Heijin and Sok and Noelle. I decided to place it within a short distance away from where the castle was going to be, and the castle was going to be just this like story, this fable type of story that is told in the town of Gloamingvale, because now I named the town maybe like 10 years ago or something, and before that it was just random small town, you know, remote kind of, but obviously eventually I named it, and everything kind of started to slowly come together because I really took a thorough look at my initial concept for the Hotel of Nightmares story, and I kept a lot of its elements that I came up with when I was really young, but I really changed a lot of things as well and gave it a ton of context. So it was like building it very slowly, and that's how it eventually became this whole thing, because I obviously had a backstory of where the hotel came from and who it was built by, and obviously that went back hundreds of years. And so I kind of fleshed that out a lot more as well. And then I thought about how the town, like what the town's relationship was to this mysterious castle in the mountains, and like what kind of things transpired and what happened to the castle over all these years leading up to present time. And all of that eventually resulted in the narrative. So that's kind of how I came up with the place and the idea for Gloamingvale. That was a very long answer to the question, but it was kind of fun for me to like think back on how it all started, and you know, sometimes I forget because it was such a long time ago. But it is really cool how all the little things kind of ended up really meshing together in ways that are so seamless to me that I can't even believe it, you know? That's what's so cool about it, because there were a lot of things that I came up with as a child that I thought just the idea of it was kind of cool. Like, I had this thing in a hotel, for the Hotel of Nightmares, where the vague idea was that there was this group of people that were doomed by destiny to end up in this place, and they didn't know any of this, but it didn't matter where they went, they were always going to end up there. and they were destined to die one day, and it was like a cyclical thing. And to me, you know, there's so little story surrounding that. It's just this concept, and that concept was so enticing to me as a kid. But now, after I was able to give it a lot more context and to really fit it in with the story, I'm kind of amazed at how well it ended up working out for my personal you know, interest, and how I still find it so fascinating, even though I came up with the initial idea when I was like 12. You know, that to me is kind of insane, but whatever. So that's the long story of how I came up with the place. And in terms of the design for the town, like what it looks like, it was relatively straightforward. I just googled a bunch of towns that are in mountains, and I picked one that looked just, it, you know, it stole my heart when I saw some pictures. And I'm not gonna say what it is, but it might be obvious later what town is kind of like the base for the visuals for Gloamingville, but you know, I'm probably gonna talk about it eventually at some point. Yeah. So, and there's a second part of this question actually. So the question is, you mentioned once you came up with the base idea for your story when you were younger, and I'd love to know how much the story and characters changed and evolved since then. Also, was it hard to stick to your story for such a long time? Also, excellent question. I think I already answered like half of it. I did come up with it when I was much younger. And so in terms of characters and how much they changed and evolved since then, I'm gonna say they changed a lot, but also not really. It's hard to explain that why exactly, but it was actually extremely important to me to preserve the feel of the characters the way that they were initially, because I think that changing characters too much makes me feel like I'm just trying to puppeteer, and like I'm taking away, I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, but once I make characters, they seem like real people, and then once I start to treat them like they're just completely changeable and I can change anything that I want about them, it starts to feel like it just feels wrong, if that makes any sense. So what I ended up doing was, instead of changing them majorly, I would just keep elaborating further and further into what kind of people they are. And you know, that did end up changing some aspects of them, but I think instead of looking at it as a major overhaul or a change, it's more like they just gained a ton of depth as a result. And on the surface, they can still be perceived in the same way that I portrayed them at the very beginning, where, like, you know, just because a person can act a certain way or can appear a certain way when you just meet them doesn't mean there isn't more to them beneath the surface. So that's kind of how I tended to approach writing the characters over the years. And I'm gonna say it was absolutely not difficult to stick to the story for such a long time. For some reason, I was worried about losing interest, but I never did. And I don't know why that is exactly, but yeah, it just felt like every time I work on the story or write it, it feels like the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. And I think that's kind of mysterious in a way. And I don't know why I'm having such a hard time fully committing to that, because there's something scary about that. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's an entirely different conversation right there. So yeah, I'm gonna move on to the next question, which is, what exactly do you work with on freelance outside of commissions? So I thought that would be kind of interesting to share, maybe. So most of the stuff that I do for freelance is character design. It's very heavy on costume. I guess there isn't a whole lot more I can say about that. So I guess my freelance gets split somewhat evenly between character design, costume design, concept work, and finished polished illustrations. So I've done a lot of illustrations that were the final step of the character design projects that I've been part of that I can't really talk about. And I have also done some illustration work like packaging. I don't really want to talk about that yet either, because none of this stuff has really come out because things take so long. in production. But some other cool stuff that I've had the pleasure to work on for freelance was doing some album covers very randomly for a New York rapper called A Boogie with a Hoodie. I don't know, that sounds really funny to say out loud, but it was a really cool project to work on. First of all, it was like one of the most legitimate things that I've worked on, because as a result of that, like the first album cover that I did for him, the album did chart like #1 at some point on Billboard, and like it was around, so I could see it around. Like it was kind of cool to just see the art floating around the internet, and I think most people have like just glimpsed it that I know of, like my friends and stuff, so that was kind of neat. And yeah, and then there was an album cover that I did afterwards for his follow-up album that he was a guest on Jimmy Fallon or something, and then it was like wild to see Jimmy Fallon holding up the album. Like I think he was holding up the vinyl version, so it was big. It was so weird, but yeah, that was really cool. So those were some really cool illustration album cover projects. And then I also did like an alternate like a deluxe release for that same album as well, and those are the 3 album covers that I did for him, which was really cool. It was super out of my comfort zone, and it was a lot of fun. Like he was super specific in terms of what kind of direction he wanted and what kind of rendering style he wanted as well, which is why honestly, like, it doesn't even really look like something I drew, but still though, pretty cool. So yeah, aside from that, I've done a couple of book covers as well. One a few years ago that was for a children's, like, not children, like a young adult, I think like younger, maybe around for 10 to 12 year old like type of audience, maybe 10 to 15 or something. It was like this horror story type of mystery novel, which I actually really enjoyed reading. Obviously I read it before I made the cover and like a couple of illustrations inside the book. It's called A Box of Bones by Marina Cohen. That was a lot of fun to work on. It was really cool to see the book on shelves as well. And yeah, that's the type of freelance that I do. And aside from that, I've done some pretty interesting stuff as well. Like, I would still consider it freelance, even though illustration wasn't exactly like the main component of it. It was like the Samsung phone commercial that I did like a few years ago. It was super random. Like, they contacted me out of the blue, and I was just essentially, I guess it was an acting job almost, because I was like on camera, and then there was a script, and then I had to act like, you know, I don't know, it was a wild experience. And it actually came at like a really convenient time, because at the time I lived alone, and in the storyboards for the trailer for the commercial, it was supposed to take place in my studio space, which I don't really have a studio space, but at the time, since I was living alone and I was kind of getting back on my feet, I didn't really have any furniture really except for my art related stuff, so it was super easy to use my condo space as, you know, the place to shoot the stuff. So it was hilarious. Like, so many people came into this tiny space with like the cameras, and it was wild. So that was really fun. And I did something somewhat similar to that, but it didn't have any like crew. I just shot everything myself, and my fiance helped me with the Intel sponsorship recently, so I guess that was kind of similar as well. I really like those types of jobs when they're super relevant to what I'm doing, because I don't know, it's doing something totally different, and it doesn't really, like, the illustration component of it is not the #1 thing, but it's obviously related, so that was kind of cool. So I guess that's typically what I tend to do for freelance. It's very random. It's just whatever comes around, and I really like how it's kind of all over the place, and I'm really excited for some of the packaging illustration that I did last year. I don't know when it's gonna come out exactly, but when it does, I'll let you guys know. So yeah, that's what I do for freelance. And I haven't actually done commissions in a pretty long time, so there's that as well. Next question. What would be your #1 tip for starting to write and illustrate a graphic novel? My #1 tip would be to just plan really well. And I've already talked about that in the first question. So hopefully you can just, that answered that. And the next question is, if you could adopt any oceanic animal as a pet, what would you pick? That's a question that I like because it has nothing to do with art, so that's pretty fun. Oceanic animal. It's kind of a tough one. I think octopuses are kind of cool. Can't really think of any other animal. I think a small octopus would be a really cool pet. Talking about pets in general, I had this phase. I really do love animals. I have been obsessed with cats since I was very young. Like, my dream when I was 4, like 5, 6, whatever, was to have a cat, and my parents didn't allow me to have one for a long time. But anyways, I had this phase at some point where I was like obsessed with bearded dragons, and I really wanted a bearded dragon. And I still kind of do, but I think it's probably too much for me to handle. But I do have a cat now, thankfully. But yeah, so, okay, next question. How did you end up choosing inks as your main medium for traditional art? So the thing about me and loving inked drawings and ink, it goes way back to when I started drawing. I think it's because I've always really loved comics. Manga specifically. So I mostly read manga, and I loved the clean, crisp inking. It was just so attractive to me, especially since it was black and white too. And I was like pretty broke. I mean, obviously I was a kid. I don't know. My parents, like, my family situation wasn't like, it wasn't like this huge struggle, but let's just say we weren't particularly well off when we came to Canada for like a long time. And so I don't know, I didn't really ask much stuff in terms of art supplies, especially for my parents, and so I didn't really have much to work with. Most of the stuff that I used to draw were art supplies that my brother had, like, you know, just had from his studies, because he was in university and he was an environmental design, not environmental, why is this escaping me now? Industrial design, yes. So he's an industrial designer, and he's always had like this engineer type of drawing stuff. Like, you know, when you see people draw like technical art, and back in the day, especially when digital art wasn't really a thing yet, it was just starting to become a thing. He mostly had micron pens for technical drawing, and grayscale sets of Prismacolor markers, or like just grayscale sets of markers for like quickly rendering objects. So that's the stuff that he used, and I would just like sneak his art materials, I guess. And so obviously microns look like, when you use micron pens to ink your character stuff, it looks exactly like manga. So I was obsessed with those, and I used microns to ink for like the longest time. I actually don't even really remember when I decided to switch to a pen and ink, like nib type of situation. I think it was sometime in college, but up until then I've only used microns or any other type of really thin inking pens, and I've always loved them, and I do think it was mostly like the manga illustration influence, and the markers as well. I used the grayscale ones a lot because that's basically all I had to work with, and that was also pretty cool because he had some colors, like a couple of colors here and there, but mostly grayscale, and that I think really is what propelled me to mostly use very monochromatic color schemes with a pop of color. So there's that, you know, directly related to just what I had available at the time. And I did have like colored pencil sets, which I used a lot as well, but I don't know, I feel like I moved on from those pretty quickly because I wasn't a huge fan of the texture. Like, I remember I had the set of Prismacolor colored pencils, and I used those a lot when I was like 12 or 13, 11, 12, 13, when I really was obsessed with Sailor Moon. And so there was a lot more color in my work, I guess, if you can call it work, my doodles. But after I discovered my brother's stuff, I just never went back, you know what I mean, up until recently. But yeah, so that's why I chose inks. I love the process of cleaning up a pencil drawing. There's something very satisfying about it to me, and always has been and always will be. So yeah. Next question. What are my inspirations, influences for character design, personality wise? And this question is a bit similar to one I talked about before, but you know, there are types of, like, as much as everyone is an individual, obviously people are very different from each other, you can still kind of separate people into groups, you know, like there are personality types, obviously, and I do have certain personality types that I like for whatever reason, and so I use those as a big kind of inspiration for my characters, I guess. I don't want to talk about this in any more detail than that, but you know, it is pretty self-indulgent in some ways. So yeah, there's that. Next question. Will I ever sell apparel again? The answer is yes. I really want to, because that one time I made apparel was this long sleeve t-shirt thing through this company, and I honestly still wear those every single day. And I got one copy of a black one because it was a white t-shirt with a design on it of Sweet actually wearing a mask so ahead of time, way before the pandemic. but yeah, I really like the design of that shirt, and I still actually wear it at home all the time, and I have a one singular copy of a black version of that shirt, which actually looks really good. I think the black one looks better, so I'm gonna think about making another design with 0 in it and bringing back the previous Sweet design as well, because I think it looks so great on a black shirt. It would be pretty cool to have that, to do that again. So yeah, I love apparel, obviously love fashion, so anything to do that again would be really cool in the future. Okay, so the next question is, do you have any advice for someone who can draw traditionally but digital art is a bit of a struggle? Continued. I usually just transfer my traditional sketches into my iPad, but I really want to get better at drawing straight from the iPad. So my answer to that would be to really figure out what it is that bothers you about sketching on the iPad directly, because I have had this experience before. And I'm gonna say that what it ended up coming down to was not having brushes that I liked. So for the longest time, I would sketch on paper and then scan that and use that as a base for like a million commissions that I did back in the day, when I was still in school, and I actually did that for most like schoolwork. By school I mean university or college or whatever. And so I think once I got a better tablet, and once Photoshop brushes became better, like more sophisticated, that's kind of when I finally found a brush that sufficiently mimicked a pencil for me that it made it easier to sketch. I actually find it pretty easy to sketch on the iPad because of that as well, if there is a screen protector that kind of feels like paper, because for me the feel of the pen against the glass is also what makes it kind of weird to sketch on digital, like on tablets and stuff. But after I got the big Cintiq screen and now I have like the 24 Pro, it's been great, because there is like the friction that the pen creates between the felt tip, like the gray felt tip on the Wacom Cintiq, and the whatever matte, semi-matte covering, glass or whatever protection on the screen. It's like pretty good. It's similar enough to drawing on paper that it's doable, and I can actually sketch now, so hopefully that helps. So yeah, to summarize, figure out what bothers you about it and see if you can solve it, whether it be getting a screen protector or figuring out or finding a brush that reminds you of the pencil enough that you can use it to sketch. Okay, I can see that this video is getting really long, so I think I am just going to answer one more question and then move on. So yeah, the last question I'm gonna answer is, okay, I'll pick one that's not gonna take too long. So okay, how do you approach starting a serious quote-unquote piece with a new medium and you have no idea how it will turn out? So I thought that was kind of a good question, because I have, you know, had to try out totally unfamiliar mediums before, and I'm gonna say that it really helps to just do some experimenting first. I don't think I've ever really approached starting a quote-unquote serious piece with a new medium that I've never used before. I would be like, I mean, if it's just for fun, I guess you could do it, but the point should be to just explore the medium and see what you can do with it, and that should be low pressure. And maybe I'm like lucky or blessed to have had only positive experiences with using new mediums. The only new medium that I've ever used that gave me trouble was digital. That I could not figure out. But if whenever I try a new medium traditionally, it always ends up being like this fun, exhilarating experience with results that are better than I expected. So just like doing some studies and maybe just testing it out first would ease the anxiety if you really can't, you know, get yourself to approach a serious piece with a new medium. But, you know, just diving in and just being experimental and just getting to know the medium is my best advice, and it should be fun more than anything. So yeah. Okay, so now that we're at about, you know, 50 minutes, like I don't know if I should carry this on to an hour, but I am a little bit congested, so it's a bit difficult for me to keep talking. I think I'm running out of juice. So yeah, hopefully that was a fun Q&A for you guys to listen to, and hopefully you enjoyed watching the process of this drawing that I did for my friend. And like I said, you should really check out her art. I will link in the description. So thank you so much for listening to this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!